Welcome to Guest of the Year. I'm the host. My name's Mike. Today's setlist curator is Joel Selvin. Joel was the longtime pop music critic for the San Francisco Chronicle and has written about rock and roll for over 40 years. He's the author of many books, including Fare Thee Well, the final chapter of the Grateful Dead's Long Strange Trip, and Altamont, the Rolling Stones' The Hells Angels, and the inside story of rock's darkest day. His latest, Drums and Demons, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon, is out everywhere now. It tells the story of Jim Gordon, the legendary drummer who laid down drums on classics like Layla, God Only Knows, and Good Vibrations, and many more, before a descent into undiagnosed schizophrenia, which led him to murder his mother and spend the rest of his life in prison. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks, Mike. What a welcome.
All right, here's how the game works. We'll play the first part of a Grateful Dead live track, and each contestant will use the messaging system to silently guess which year the performance is from. Contestants who are all on a video conference together can message in their guesses at any time during the clip or in the 10 seconds after it concludes. Whoever is furthest from the correct year is eliminated. The last two deadheads standing hear 3 tracks, and whoever is closest to the correct years in aggregate wins. We've got our returning champ Phil here with us, and we'll meet the rest of the deadheads in a moment, but first, without further ado, the Grateful Dead. That was Turn On Your Love Light at the Civic Auditorium in San Francisco, later Bill Graham, at the Bay Area Music Awards on March 12th, 1988. Joel, can you tell us about this show?
Yeah. Did you notice the harmonica solo? That was Huey Lewis. That is a joint appearance of the Grateful Dead with Huey Lewis and the News. And I was kind of the matchmaker in that deal. The Bay Area Music Awards was an annual event, and they were having trouble selling tickets, and they appealed to a bunch of us for help. And I called Huey and asked him, did he think, Huey once sat in with the Grateful Dead when he was 13 years old, high on acid and stark naked. Yeah, he was up for it, and it wasn't hard to convince the Dead, although, you never know who to ask. But in those days, if Jerry thought it was a good idea, it happened. And frankly, the idea is what held the day. Was it a good idea? Was this fun? Was this going to have was there some reason to do this? They weren't careerists. It wasn't going to be, we need the exposure.
I want to touch on real quick before we get into your book about Jim is Fare Thee Well, which I read in literally one sitting. It's essentially about the Cold War for attendees for their concerts between Phil and Bob after Jerry died. Given how close you have been to the Dead and how you've been around them for so long, was it a bit awkward to take sometimes critical lens with the various interpersonal stuff and write stuff that maybe they wouldn't want someone to write?
That didn't start with the book. But look, I knew what the story was going in, and I knew what I was wading into. And yeah, there was a lot of pushback in various quarters, and there was a lot of encouragement in various quarters. There were people that very much wanted that story told, and then there were people that wanted nothing to do with it. I learned a lot about both journalism and reporting and all that in doing the book. But the part you're talking about, the sensitive areas and people's intensely emotional feelings and the different accounts of the events, that was difficult to untangle at times, I must admit.
Difficult practically or emotionally, or?
Oh, emotionally, I didn't have a real problem. I'm not a deadhead. I never have been. Uh,
I was going to ask you that.
no,
Doesn't
I'm
seem
not.
like
I'm
it.
not. I mean,
Yeah.
the those are the guys that used to stand over on the right-hand side of Fillmore West, reek of patchouli, and dance with their hands over their heads, you know? I remember them showing up, and, at Winterland there was a tiny little postage stamp parking lot in the back, and it sold out way before, showtime every night, except when the Dead played, because the Dead audience showed up on public transportation. They had these buses pull up outside of Winterland that were just stuffed full of smelly freaks. So, yeah, the Deadhead, thing was never a club I wanted to join, but the band was interesting and the music was interesting. So, I spent time around it, but, like, I never went to 2 shows in a row. I never traded tapes or even really listened to tape. That's why this, program was such a challenge. It's like, how am I gonna do that, I pulled it out of shows I went to, right?
Well, it's a great pick, Joel. You threw these deadheads for a loop. The closest was Brian. Brian guessed 1990. Brian is 43 from Vail, Colorado. Nice pull, Brian. Tell us about 1990.
Obviously, I had no idea with that harmonica solo. Definitely threw me for a loop. But so, of course, you have to think, was that Pigpen? But the drums and the bass was just way too big to be early dead. So then I was thinking a lot of guests in 1990 had Winston Marsalis and I think a couple other sit-ins. So I was thinking maybe that could be part of that like 1990 Nassau MSG run. I wasn't stoked about it because 1990, you got Bobby a lot of reverb on his guitar, which I didn't hear a whole lot. I heard a little bit of Brent, sort of that twinkly into the dark, kind of light ambient tones, but I don't know. Lucky guess.
No, it's not luck. That's a good one. Next closest was John. John guessed 1984. John is 62 from Charlotte, North Carolina. John, you're on to the next round. Nice job. Why 84?
Well, the first thing that got me was the harmonica and stuff, and I was thinking it was probably like a New Year's run or something, and I was thinking maybe 1984 Matthew Kelly might have played with them. I was kind of going there, and seemed like a good kind of in the middle number, so that's what I went with, and kind of sounded like some of the stuff I used to see, and I was around a lot in '84, so.
Attendance bias, they call that.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much all of my knowledge is attendance based.
That's a good problem to have.
You and me both, John.
Okay, there you go.
So the next closest was Phil. He guessed 82. Paul guessed 69. Yeah, Phil is 43 from Verona, New Jersey. Phil is our returning champ, 82.
You know, I was totally yeah, I was definitely kind of grasping for whatever I could gather. I couldn't quite hear what the keyboard situation was. And the recording wasn't super awesome. I was just kind of like, what is going on up there? And I thought to myself, there were those New Year's shows where they had a lot of guests, and I think it was 82 with the singer who I'm forgetting her name at the moment.
Etta,
You guys
Etta
know what I'm
James.
talking about.
Etta James.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Etta James and horns, Tower of Power. I'm like, you
They
know what?
opened
Maybe
an
this is.
auditorium. Mickey
Yeah, you were
called
there,
me
Joel.
in the
You
middle
know,
of the
Joel.
show.
Wait, he called you during the show?
Yeah, he called me and says, Etta's coming to sing midnight. You got to get your ass out of bed and come down here. I'm, oh, fuck, okay. I lived in Oakland at that point, so it wasn't too horrible.
Yeah, you're not too horrible.
I can take or leave the Grateful Dead, but Etta James, now that's something else.
So I just take it Mickey knows you're not a deadhead.
Yeah, Mickey knows who I am, and we're pals. We've been friends for a long, long time.
Got it. Phil, go on. Yeah.
No, I mean that's basically that was my guess. Was like thinking maybe it's from that run, and just thinking like I just really couldn't quite pin it down. So I went with something in the middle of the career and something I had a little hunch on, which was totally wrong, but here we are.
Paul, guest 69. He's from Palo Alto. Paul, tell us about your thought process there.
Yeah, big whiff. This is sort of my worst nightmare, was going on this show and then having a colossal whiff. So no, no excuse, but I was having trouble with my audio. So like, I was just hearing it out of the computer speakers and it just sounded like wild and energetic and kind of thrashy. And I knew with Love Light, it was either going to be, like 69 or 70, or it was going to be mid to late 80s. And so I was trying to kind of like, I couldn't hear keyboards at all. I obviously no vocals. So I was just sort of keying in on the harmonica, and I was sort of coin tossing between 69 and 87, which is obviously quite a big difference. And I picked tails when I should have picked heads.
How'd you get into the Dead, Paul?
So I grew up in New York suburbs, Larchmont, New York, and went to high school in the 80s, and the Dead were just huge then in my high school and with my buddies. So some of my closest friends started seeing shows in like 85. I was probably like 14 at that point, and my parents were like, no fucking way. But eventually, a year or two later, I got out and started seeing shows, and was lucky enough to kind of see probably 30 or 40 shows in the Jerry era up and down the East Coast. And happened to be my fall semester abroad was in Europe when they did the Europe 90 tour. So my quote unquote study abroad included 2 shows in Paris and 3 shows in London, which was awesome. And then now I live in Palo Alto. Like literally half a mile from where Bob and Jerry met at Dana Morgan Music. And my office is in Menlo Park, like a block from the original Magoo's location. So I don't know. Somehow these guys keep following me around.
And your Deadheadery has never faded even after Jerry died?
Yeah, I still saw a lot of the, post Jerry bands. I read the book, Joel. I thought it was awesome. I saw pretty much all of those variants of kind of post Jerry, and from the audience, you never know exactly what's going on. It always seemed like a bunch of drama and sort of tension and strange kind of evolution. And your book sort of like put us all in the room for it, which I thought was really fun to watch, fun to read. I still love the Dead. I actually I'm sure Deadheads will hate this, but probably 8 or 10 years ago, I started getting a bit more into Fish, and probably see more Fish now than Dead. But love them both, and obviously a big part of my life.
Do you think Fish is hitting a creative peak, as Trey and people online say they are?
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing them, 5 to 8 times a year, I'd say, since like maybe for the last 7 or 8 years, and they keep getting better and better. I mean, they sound really good, and to me, that was such a big difference from my experience with the Dead, right? Like between 87. Those first few years that I was seeing the Dead, like late 80s into 89, 90, I thought they sounded really good and pretty tight. And then it was like immediately just kind of sliding again. I was too young to see like early to mid 80 shows, which I know were super hit or miss as well. So yeah, there's just kind of a, Fish, there's sort of like this consistency maybe that comes with being mostly drug free and yeah, they're mostly and but yeah, they sound great.
Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mike. Thanks so much for doing this. It's been fun to listen and fun to briefly participate.
Appreciate
it. Good luck,
Paul.
guys.
Phil, Brian, and John are on in the next round. Joel has another track. All right, the guesses are in. St. Stephen. On Halloween in 1983 at Marin County Veterans Auditorium. Joel, that was the bust out, correct?
Yeah. They had played it the night before. I forget where they were, like LA or somewhere, and there was a big buzz about it. Like, they played St. Stephen's. You think they'll play it tonight? and I'm standing with Paul Grushkin, who wrote The Art of the Deadheads. He's a Deadhead writer, and Rock Scully, the band's manager, bursts through the doors, and he's in a hurry to go somewhere, but he sees us and he stops. And Grushkin says to him, "Are the guys going to play St. Stephen?" He goes, "Well, I don't know." And I got to tell you, Rock is blasted, just blasted. His eyes are spinning in his head. And Grushkin says, everybody's on about it because they heard they played it last night, and everybody wants them to play it. And Rock says, "Should I go tell them?" And Paul says, yeah, you should go tell them. So he turns around and goes off the way he came, right? And Grushkin leans back, he smiles, he goes, "Oh, Rock will take care of this." I said, "Are you kidding? He was on his way to do something when he ran into us. He's going to forget about what we went backstage for in about 30 seconds.
Your new book, Drums and Demons, about Jim Gordon, the drummer who ended up in jail for life for killing his mom. How did you end up writing this book? And did you get Jim to cooperate in jail before he passed away?
No, he wasn't forthcoming. We communicated, he never answered any of my letters. But that's typical of sort of late stage schizophrenia. They tend to be very withdrawn. And people who are in prison with Jim tell me that, he was pretty quiet and kept to himself. He was very ill. When I describe his symptoms to medical professionals, they think it sounds like somebody who's about as ill as you can get. Schizophrenia is incredibly common, 1 in 100 in the general population. And of those people, 50% don't respond to treatment. The other 50% is a sliding scale, the bottom end, productive, normal lives with just slight adjustments. And that goes all the way up to heavily medication and big struggle and lots of coping mechanisms. And then people that just can't. So, but Jim was high functioning, as they say. And then he carried on a career as a studio musician and a performer that was just unparalleled. And his playing was also like something entirely out of this world. Ask another drummer. They all know his work. And I feel like two things. One, that his incredible ability to divide time, this intuition that was such an incredible part of his arsenal, came from the same place that his disease came from, the same electrochemical setup system in his brain. And the other thing is, I believe that playing the drums, between the report of the drum, which you reverberates in every cell of your body, and the rhythmic entrainment, which is quite hypnotic, he didn't hear voices when he played drums. He was well. He was whole. He was safe. So all this gets to be very, pretty gothic when you start thinking about it. But you asked how I come to the book. Well, I ran across some people that were working on a book with Jim like 30 years ago, and they were done with the book. They were amateurs, and they were splitting up. One was going to Texas, one was going to Montana, and I pitched them, let me buy your research. And one of them was fine with that. The other one couldn't do it. It was too personal. So 30 years later, I'm talking to a book editor in New York, and he says my next book should somehow be rock and roll and crime. As soon as he says that, Jim Gordon's name comes up. And I dialed back, and I found one of the gals, and she had her research, and I acquired it. And so I had a stack of research that was really, already lots of Jim interviews, lots of really good material. And that was the nut that I started to build the book on. There's 100 interviews, there's 1,000 hours and incredible amounts of reading and stuff like that. But basically, I started out with a file folder full of interview transcripts.
And you were able to corroborate that their research was good?
Well, the interviews with a schizophrenic are not, it was like a radio station that sort of came in and then sputtered a little and then went out and then came back in. You had to decode them, and then you had to reverse engineer it. I talked to tons of people who worked with Jim, and these gals had a lot of excerpts from his diaries. They were funny though. I mean, she didn't really know what she was writing about. It's like I go, you guys, you had access to his diaries? She goes, yeah, but they were just studio dates. Oh, that's a studio date, okay.
Yeah, a large portion of the book is him weaving in and out of these studio sessions, and like every paragraph has some hit attached to it. One thing in particular I'm impressed by is your ability to like compile page turners. What's the secret for writing a page turner?
Well, 5,000 newspaper articles, a newspaper article, you don't have any spare time or any spare words. You have to grab people's attention and pull them all the way through it. So, that is where I learned how to do what I do. I've written about 20 books. It's amazing how it mounted up on me. So I've got some experience with the long form now. And the Jim Gordon thing, I mean, it ripped my heart out. And there were times where I just had to fold my tent and go upstairs and take a nap. I came to really care about Jim. I came to realize that he'd not received any compassion or understanding in his lifetime, that when you kill your mother brutally, people just avert their eyes and forget they knew you. Nobody really knew how desperate his life had become.
Well, I'd recommend everyone check out the book. The link is in the show notes. It's, as I said, it's a page turner, as all of Joel's books are.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, it really is. The closest, or two guys got it. Brian and John both got 83. Phil, our returning champ, is eliminated 85. Way to go, Brian and John. John, we'll start with you. Did you recognize it as the St. Stephen bust out?
Well, I actually saw one. It was I'm not sure if it was the same month, but when they broke it out in '83, I was in Madison Square Garden when they played it there.
How was that?
Oh, it was great. I mean, the whole crowd was like, when they even went into just you could hear the first notes of the song. All of a sudden, all you could hear was just 20,000 people, yelling at the top of their lungs for a minute until they kind of calmed down and listened. And it was very good. Yes.
Way to go, John. You're on to the next round, as is Brian, who also diagnosed it correctly, 83. Brian, talk to us.
Yeah, I may be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure the only time they played St. Stephen in the Brent era was 83. So I know they played it in 79, but I'm pretty sure Keith was still in the band. So honestly, at first, I thought it might have been earlier 80s. I thought Brent's keyboards kind of sounded like it had that early 80s sound, and Phil's bass had that really big sound like the Irwin that he was playing 79 and 80. But once I realized it was St. Stephen and it was Brent, then it made it process of elimination.
Way to go. Way to go, Brian. Phil, 85.
Which brings us to Phil. I literally was sitting there going to myself, was it 83 or 85? Which is the year they brought back the St. Stephen? And that was the tape trading geek in my head. That's what I was doing. It's like, I know what's going on here, just which one was it? And I picked the wrong one. Some serious competitors here. And always a pleasure playing the game. It's great.
Well, fabulous run, Phil. You were incredible last week, and it was a pleasure having you back this week.
Can I give a quick shout out?
Hit it.
Shout out to the NYC Freaks. Bunch of music seeing friends of mine. We've been doing it since the early 2000s. Some of them are going to end up listening to this and being like, oh, that's Phil from the Freaks list. So
hell yeah.
Yeah. I know you guys like J-Rad. J-Rad's first gig was a New York City Freaks party. Those guys are like tied in. So,
no way.
Yeah. More stories to come if I ever see you guys again.
John and Brian are on to the finals. Joel has 3 tracks. Whoever is lowest in aggregate, the least number of years off in aggregate, wins Guess the Year. Let's hear Joel's first pick of the finals. guesses are in. Franklin's Tower, August 13th, 1975, at the Great American Music Hall. One from the Vault. Joel, classic pick. Were you at that show?
Sure was.
Oh, shit.
That was one of those gigs that they did in their hiatus, and it was an invited audience of radio programmers that were in town for something called the Gavin Conference, and they had that record label, Grateful Dead Records, and the guy that was running the record label prevailed on the band to do a showcase for radio programmers because they didn't ever get any radio play. So here's an opportunity to get in front of 400 radio programmers. So they did it. And the music hall is this very ornate 450-seat club with balconies and, 19th century building that survived the earthquake. And Hart brought a cage of crickets and mic'd the crickets and fed that into the live sound. There was some other sort of Mickey Hart sound experiments. No rehearsal. These guys had been playing for ages together. They got on that little stage in that little room and they just roared. It was wonderful. It's all Blues for Allah and the next record stuff. No Fillmore material. It was all fresh Grateful Dead. Pretty amazing night, yeah.
Was the crowd of DJs and producers any good?
No, the crowd was stiff. Are you kidding? They were drunk radio programmers. There was no twirling.
As a Deadhead adjacent person, you knew like, oh, this is a particularly good show in the moment.
Oh, it was phenomenal. And Franklin's Tower just ripped my head off. For a person that liked the Grateful Dead when they were great and not fucking around, and this was as focused and sincere and intense a performance I ever saw him give.
You wrote another great book on Altamont. Could you tell everyone how the Dead figured into that whole debacle?
Well, the Altamont was a Grateful Dead production. It was Rock Scully's idea, and he gave it to Keith Richards, and the Stones decided, yeah, well, we'll just let the Dead do it, and they've done this sort of thing before. It went bad from the start. I mean, it was supposed to be in Golden Gate Park, and that would have been a whole different thing. The Grateful Dead were well accustomed to putting on large shows in Golden Gate Park. But then it got bounced out of San Francisco and moved up to a raceway in Sonoma, like 60 miles north of San Francisco. And they started building a stage there on Wednesdays, shows on Saturday. And on Thursday, they find out that the people on the racetrack are not going to let them do it. And then they find this other racetrack, this dilapidated thing, which is 60 miles east of San Francisco. So they start tearing down the stage around 5 o'clock on Thursday and start building the stage at the other place. So, it's just a mess. And the Angels were problematic. That's a complicated issue. Everybody thinks that like the Angels were security guards. They weren't. They were different chapters of the Hells Angels, and the San Francisco Hells Angels lived across the street from the Grateful Dead house, and they were there in a bus. They didn't cause any problems. They were helping people, as a matter of fact. The ones in front of the stage, those guys with the pool cues, those were from a San Jose chapter that was only recently formed, and a lot of prospects that were going to be trying to join the club. The cops think there were only 40 Hells Angels at Altamont, right? But the ones in the front, the San Jose guys, were real trouble, and they were beating on people from the very first. They chased some guy across the stage during Santana's set, and that was the opening act, and beat him to a pulp right in front of Greg Raleigh on the organ. And it just went on like that all day. Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young played, and some biker had a motorcycle spoke sharpened, and he was sticking it in Stephen Still's leg every time he stepped up to the microphone to sing. It was insane. A lot of bad drugs. I mean, you got to figure there's some sort of mass toxic deal You're talking about an audience of 300,000 and got to be at least 50,000 of them on drugs. And the drugs were not the kind of stuff that had been passed around in San Francisco in 66 and 67. These were manufactured by people who were charlatans, and it was horrible stuff. It was cut with strychnine and methamphetamine, and so all that's going on too. Bert Kangen was the one of the Dead's guys that worked with city bureaucracy, getting park permits and stuff like that. And he had jumped in to the middle of a fight, trying to break up the Hells Angels from pounding on some poor dude, and got 60 stitches in his head as a result. They had a big bandage on and then a hat. And then, of course, rather famously, Hell's Angel knocked Marty Ballin out during the airplane show. And less famously, knocked him out a second time backstage shortly thereafter. But what really happened then was that the Grateful Dead's roadie, Rex Jackson, and Rex was their enforcer. He was a big guy. He was a serious dude. And he went after that Hell's Angel. And the Hell's Angel laid him out. Rex had 2 black eyes. He was knocked out cold. So you see in the movie, Michael Shreva-Santana telling Jerry and Phil, oh, wow, man, they beat up Marty Ballin. And Jerry, who's reeling from some designer drug of Owsley's called STP, says, oh, wow, bummer. But really, they get to backstage and they see Rex. And that's where they realize, man, this situation is out of hand. So they climb into a Metro van to have a little impromptu band meeting. And some Hell's Angel thinks he's funny, goes and sticks a cane in the door so they can't get out. Rattle, 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 rattle. No. It took them a while to get out of the van, but they were very clear at that point. They were not going to play the gig. They were just going to go home and let it happen. And they went back to the Fillmore where they were supposed to play that night. They did not play. But that was a huge pivot point for the Dead. That's December. In January, their manager absconded with all their money. They were arrested in New Orleans. Owsley was sent back to prison. It was a very dark time for the band. And they come out of it in February by going into the studio and recording all these new Hunter Garcia songs that had been written under the influence of music from Big Pink. They thought it was sort of Buck Owens, Bakersfield type music, and that's what Working Man's Dead was. Working Man's Dead was a tonic.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah, great book. Brian guessed 77, and he was closer because John guessed 1980. Brian, 77.
So, first of all, I'm totally kicking myself because Joel, Mike told us you're going to be our curator, I think on Sunday. So I checked out your Wikipedia page, which there's a great picture of you grilling chili pepper in front.
Steve Miller took that photo.
No way.
So I scrolled down and I saw they threw a retirement party for you at Great American Music Hall with Bonnie Raitt and Booker T. Jones. So at work today, I was actually thinking you're probably going to play this exact show. And I should have guessed this, and I didn't. But yeah, I thought it was 77. 75, I just kind of associate with like not as crisp drums between Mickey and Billy because they're still coming back. I thought they sounded great. I thought Keith sounded really strong, really on the front of the mix. And so I just thought, and even Donna's vocals, I thought sounded a little more polished than 75. So that's why I went with 77. But yeah, Great American Music Hall. I should have known.
Well, it wasn't the official release mix. That was the FM radio capture. So that is why I think you guys both maybe have gotten a little tripped up. John, you guessed 1980.
Yeah, and that Great American Music Hall is like one of the very first bootlegs I had, probably in 1975 or 6 when I was like 14 or 15 years old. So there's no reason I should not have gotten it, but it sounded so good, and I don't know why, but I thought that Franklin sounded like first I was thinking like it sounded like one I heard in 78, first year I was seeing them, or in 1980, actually in at the University of Florida. We went and saw them there, and they opened the second set up with a shakedown into Franklin's, and I thought it was sounded like that. So, I didn't even go to 75. I didn't go there. I don't know why. It was like a senior moment almost.
That's probably the first time they played that song.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was. And it was like the first time we heard it, besides that it was not on the album. We had heard the album, but we hadn't heard any live versions of it until then. So I should have known, and I don't know why I didn't, but I'm in a hole now. So
still two more songs left. Before we go on, John, you kind of started alluding to it. How'd you get into the Dead?
First, I was probably about 12 or 13, and I was the youngest in the family. I grew up. We were, Beatles were big, and the Stones, and all those shows. And when I was like 11 or 12, I met this kid in like 4th or 5th grade, and he was into jazz and stuff like that. And so we started listening to Miles Davis and Stanley Clarke and John McLaughlin, got into Santana through him and all these other bands. And then he finally, I think it was about a year later, he got a first Grateful Dead album I ever heard was Blues for Allah. And I went and bought that at the brand new when I was 14 at the record board. And but I'd heard that, and then of course I backtracked to all the other stuff and quickly became my favorite band, and finally got to see them. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, so we didn't have a whole lot of shows there, but I was 16 going on 17. I actually saw my first show at Duke University in 78 on my 17th birthday. And then after that, it was a few more during high school. And then through college, it was 30, 40 times a year, taking a full load in college and going to those shows, traveling everywhere, and, coming home to catch exams. And I had a 5-year college career, and it was a lot of that was due to the fact that I, spread it out a little bit because I was seeing so many shows.
Priorities. So what kept you coming back?
I think the thing that got me first is what kept me going was the fact that I was into like improv, people creating on stage and in an environment where they felt creative. And I just thought I saw them as creating new music every time I saw them live. It was never the same. And I always came away thinking a different way about a certain song or the way they played it and the jams that they went into. And our big thing was, during the transitions between songs, I became very good at picking out what the next song was going to be.
Did you like to sit in the same spot every time?
Well, it was normally we went with a group of friends. So of course you wanted to be with your friends, and we liked being in front of Jerry. So we had to change our spot because we were at the show where in 82, where he changed sides with Phil. He had always been on the opposite side, and all of a sudden I think he wanted to be nearer to Brent. So he moved over to his side of the stage. And that was at the Duke show in 82, April 2nd, 82, when they switched sides once and for all.
That's back when they weren't giving Phil even a microphone.
Right. No, they weren't. He didn't have the mic again until a couple of years later. By 85, he had the mic back. But yeah, you're right.
Well, let's hear Joel's second choice of 3.
Yeah. All right. Good luck on this one, guys.
It was Blues for Allah. On March 23rd, 1975, this snack benefit concert, 275s in a row. Joel, I'm just going to take a wild guess and say you were at that show too.
Oh yeah, that is such an amazing performance because it was a very tight program, and the Dead were allocated exactly 30 minutes. Uh, this is like, you know, the old Grateful Dead. I mean, they could cough for 30 minutes. And I'm up in the booth with the guy who owned the radio station that was broadcasting it. And for some reason, the Bill Graham people decided they were going to give the broadcast the station that doesn't do the rock. You know, they always do the rock station. So let's give the other guy one, right? And he was the easy listening adult contemporary, Carpenters, Helen Reddy, that kind of stuff. And Gabbert's a nice guy, and he owned the radio station. It wasn't like it was a corporate thing. And I'm up there in the booth, and this fantastic jam is going on. I mean, it's just like you're talking about, John, like music being made right in front of your eyes, right? They didn't know what was going on. Merle's on the keyboards, Brent's on the keyboard, Keith's on the keyboards. Ned Lagan's in there playing bass. I mean, it's just insane, and nobody knew. Everybody was watching everybody's hands. I mean, and Gabbert puts on the headphones. He leans down and and you can just see his brow furrows. He tries to listen and figure out what this is. And he takes it off and he looks right at me and he goes, "Joel, we're going to need some commentary from you after this." You know, Dylan was the big event that day. He showed up with Neil Young's band, and they closed the show. Brando made an appearance, and there's a lot of great photos of Bill Graham and Brando and Francis Coppola backstage that day. The Dead were just like almost incidental to the program, but they were there half hour. I mean, you put the Dead into a half-hour slot, it's, you know, it was hilarious, and so it's a brilliant piece. I in preparing for the show, I refreshed my recollection with it. It's just brilliant, but it's also like has no compositional parameters. It just sort of bleeds all over the stage.
I've got Bill Graham's book on my desk, or like the biography about him. Is there a book, a person, or a story that someone beat you to, and you're like, "Fuck, I could have written a good book about that."
100. But listen, when you get to that part where he talks about closing the sacred store, that's the chapter title, and toward the end of that chapter, where he starts talking about how he didn't want to lie, he didn't want to cheat, but he was forced to lie and cheat. It is the most extraordinary piece of flagrant self-justification this side of President Trump. It's just like, if he hadn't been dead when that book came out, I'm sure he would have caught that and go, "Oh, I'm taking it out." But he was dead. He was never going to finish that book. He just stayed up all night working on it every night.
So you were around him the whole time, it seems.
Bill was a pain in my ass for, you know, as long as he ran that operation, because he was under the impression that I worked in the promotion department of Bill Graham Presents and somebody else paid me. I don't believe we were speaking at the time of his death, but I can't remember. That happened a lot. I also got thrown out of the shows a lot, you know. "He can never come to one of my shows again." Huh? I developed a whole sort of spoken word thing about being thrown out of shows by Bill Graham. I called it Club 86. You know, you're not in till you're out. And I told Mickey about it, and Mickey was absolutely fascinated. He goes, "Jerry and I are in Club 86. Janice too."
It seems like you and Mickey are good pals. When the Dead reached the stratosphere and they were playing, football stadiums for 3 nights in a row, were you ever, like, worried about your friend? Like, "Fuck, I hope this ends up okay."
Uh, we watched Jerry's health deteriorate. I mean, that was really obvious, especially after that hospitalization in the late 80s. I mean, you know, he was pretty much dead then. Uh, but you know, no, I didn't really feel like those guys were in danger. They certainly weren't going to suffer the sort of ego problems that a lot of people that experience success then have to deal with. What they call the acquired narcissism syndrome. That wasn't going to affect those guys, and I saw them run through money like it was useless. It had no meaning to them whatsoever. I remember when they made that movie, and they just bought all the equipment you needed to make the movie. And they had like 8 hippies in a house up in Mill Valley, like editing film. None of these hippies had ever edited film before. They didn't know how to operate these things. So that not only were the equipment expensive, it was being run incompetently, and these people were having a learning curve that was going to cost money in the long term. The Dead were fantastic that way. When they bailed in '76, they had 300 people working for them. They had their own fucking travel agency.
Do you chalk a lot of that lack of ego up to psychedelics?
Certainly that has something to do with it. I remember talking to Jerry about the role that psychedelics played in their relationships, because they had literally hundreds of shared psychedelic experiences all through many years. And, Jerry felt that was connected them in ways that would deeper than their ability to understand. And I'm sure that's true. He said it created a tremendous amount of empathy, and that it also created channels of competition. And he didn't necessarily think the competition was bad. So,
thank you, Joel. John got it exactly 75. Brian guessed 82. So Brian is 10 years off over 2 songs. John is 5 years off over 2 songs. John, nice pull. You recognized it as the Blues for Allah there.
That was definitely 75. In fact, it was so loose. And I think I could hear Merle. And I think, like, what's that song, Stronger Than Dirt, which was actually based on the Comet commercial, or Ajax, Stronger Than Dirt.
Oh, I didn't know that was based on a commercial.
Yeah. Kreutzmann said that one in his book, that it was based on that commercial.
That's funny.
Yeah. Yep. Stronger Than Dirt. Da-da-da-da.
Way to go, John. You're in a good position going to the last song. Brian, 82.
I knew they brought the Blues for Allah jam back from like 81 to 84. I thought I heard the Hammond B3 in there, so I thought it was Brent. So that's what I went with. But we'll see. I think I had 9. I got 9. 2 plus 7. So
oh shit, you're 2 years off before. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
2 years,
all good, but still in a hole.
And you did hear the B3. You're right.
Okay, but it wasn't Brent.
Yeah, it just wasn't Brett.
Right.
Oh, that's brutal, Brian. That's a nice pull picking up on the B3. Yeah.
All good.
How did you get into the Dead, Brian?
So I grew up in New Hampshire, and in the mid 90s, when I was in junior high, Phish was just starting to get really big, and New England provincialism is a real thing. So there was definitely this sense that this was our band, even at that young age. And with that was like an immediate understanding and reverence for the Dead. So Jerry passed away when I was 13, and he was like a mythical being at that point when you're in middle school. So college and beyond, the Dead were everywhere. Camping trips, skiing trips. At our wedding, we had a Dead Phish orchestra, which is half Grateful Dead, half Phish tribute band. That was our wedding band. So always been a part. I would say what kind of accelerated my appreciation to the eras and what they were able to put together is after college. I wouldn't say it was a midlife crisis because I was in my 20s, but wasn't thrilled with the 9 to 5. So I just took a few years off and saw a lot of music. So I saw a lot of the offshoots. And then I saw a lot of Dark Star Orchestra. So I met their publicist on an airplane, and he said, anytime you want to be the day of street team, just hang up posters, coffee shops and bars. We'll get you on the list. And so I just took weeks off from life and just followed them up in East Coast. And it was so cool. Like one night you're in Winterland 77, and the next night you're in Egypt 78, and the next night you're Giant Stadium in the 90s, right? So I got really good at trying to guess which year it was just based on like the setup. Like their attention to detail is pretty incredible. So this show is really cool because it's a different look at it, right? You get dropped in the middle of it and try to navigate your way as opposed to putting the set list together. So yeah, Fish and Dark Star was definitely my intro into it. I just want to tell Joel a quick story. I also read Fare Thee Well in one sitting. I went to go see Fish 4 nights in Las Vegas in 2018. And I went a couple days early and went hiking around in Death Valley and read it all kind of in that one little camping trip. So I got back to the hotel in Vegas, and I was telling my friend, I read this book, and all of a sudden, strangers stopping strangers, right? Someone else read the book, and someone else read the book, and all of a sudden, like hanging out on the pool, waiting for Halloween Fish show, talking about your point about how Phil needed to be center stage for the Fare Thee Well concerts. Like that was so interesting to all of us. So maybe you saw this coming in the 60s when you started, but like you had a whole group of people at a Fish concert in Las Vegas going details in your book. So thanks for writing that.
I love hearing it. Thank you. That's great. Yeah.
Brian, that's funny you had a Dead Fish cover band at your wedding. Because for some reason, I've always run through the hypothetical in my brain where if I had a Dead cover band at my wedding, which sounds great, how much input would I get on the set list? Did you diagram it for them?
They were very cool about it. They say send us your top 10 songs you really want to hear, and we'll try to work them in. So they were very gracious about it and very cool. To the point where my wife, her favorite band is Hanson, like Mbop Hanson. So she, in order for me to get my band that I wanted, they had to learn one Hanson song, and they did.
Did they jam it out?
They did. Roll Away the Mbopajaboo.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And what was your number one song you wanted them to play?
So our first song, we wanted them to play How Sweet It Is. So little Jerry Garcia band cover. So that was really cool.
Cool. And I'm guessing they didn't throw down like a 40-minute tweezer on your attendees.
They played a Harry Hood, which if you're familiar with that song, that gets pretty out there. Everyone seemed to enjoy it.
Rad. Cool wife too.
Yeah, very cool.
Right on. Well, we've heard from John and Brian, the last one. Joel, how did you initially get into the Dead?
Well, the San Francisco music scene just exploded in my face in 1965. And I was in high school, and I was target audience. And there were bands everywhere all the time. The Grateful Dead were one of many. And the first time I saw them, they were playing with a band from Sacramento called the Union Jacks. And they were at the Berkeley Veterans Auditorium, which was across the street from where I went to high school. I think there were about 50 people there, maybe. I know that the light show was so primitive that it was just done through one of those old opaque projectors. Somebody had a bowl of colored oils, and they had this like square of light show on the wall. And they were unimpressive to me. The next time I saw them, they were opening for Chuck Berry at the Fillmore. And Chuck Berry, now that was something I could understand. Rock and roll, I'm there. So these guys came out, and they were a blues band. They opened with Good Morning Little Schoolgirl. The singer was fantastic. And then they had this brilliant guitar player. I made considerable note of them at that point, although Chuck Berry was gigantic, just huge, but that was just the beginning. I mean, at that point, they were on every other bill I went to for the next 2 years. They had no market outside of San Francisco. Little bit in New York, but really they weren't worth a dime anywhere else. So they were just around town all the time as the second band on the bill. I waited through more Grateful Dead shows than any other band, and all these things were just, they were events around the area, and by 1971, I was working at the newspaper, so not only was I obliged to attend to these things, but I was welcome. I spent a lot of time at their rehearsal halls. They were real comfortable with having people hanging out, and came to know all the other guys, the Ramrod and Parrish and those cats, and uh, I mean, visited their homes, I remember going into Bobby's little treehouse recording studio and seeing all these little clippings out of my Sunday column with his name on it that he'd scotch taped to the wall. I'm like, I have a role here.
You said you made note of Pigpen and Jerry. Did you take notes during the show, or how did you?
Yeah. Could I read them the next day? Sometimes.
Okay.
I try to keep a set list going. I don't think my notes contain my thoughts a lot, I think they tended to be sort of observational things. I'm not sure how much I relied on them either.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Brian. We'll see if Brian can make up the 5-year deficit over the next track. Let's hear Joel's fifth and possibly final pick. All right, the guesses are in. It was Viola Lee Blues at Kings Beach Bowl in Lake Tahoe on February 23rd, 1968. Joel, can you tell us about that Viola Lee Blues?
Well, I'm not like I told you, I'm not much of a taper. And the disc picks, they came in the mail, and I just put them up on the shelf, and I listened to them a little here and there. But that one's a fabled tape because that's the basis for Anthem of the Sun. They cut that tape up in little bits, tiny little bits, and put it back together, and down in the basement of Richard Begg's studio in North Beach. And people tell me that there are like hundreds of pieces of tape hanging in the studio, just like confetti. And that's the tape. And Viola Lee Blues was just absolutely my fucking favorite Grateful Dead moment in 67, 68. I remember New Year's Eve that year at Winterland, 5,400 people in the audience on LSD, 6 people on the stage on LSD, an extremely sensitive environment, and Viola Lee Blues, just everybody just was expanded up to the rafters, and when they came down on the one, the whole place just elevated. It was astonishing. That was like the essence of the Grateful Dead experiences, the Viola Lee Blues.
Beautiful. These guys both got it, 68, which means John wins. Congrats, John. Good pull, both you guys. John.
I gotta say, everybody you've had on was incredibly knowledgeable and astute, and had great ears. It's really, these guys are all listeners, man, and it's impressive. It's impressive.
I totally agree. You guys are great. Yeah, John, how'd you figure out it was 68?
Well, I mean, that's basically when I heard the Viola Lee, that sound is pretty much peak era Primal Dead. That's what I call it, the Primal Dead. It wasn't the early Dead of 66, but the 67 and 68 period was just that primal period. And it's by 69, they're getting into a little more of the songwriting era, and but the Primal Dead era, that just sounded just like it.
And Brian, was there any waffling, or you just knew 68?
Yeah, totally agree that Primal Dead sound. I was kind of wavering between like late 67 or 68, but I thought Mickey and Billy sounded really good. So maybe think two drummers. And the little feedback kind of distortion made me think 68. So yeah, great pick. Love that song.
Way to go, Brian. Nice run. John, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you, John. It was great hearing your stories, and great call on that Blues for Allah. You crushed that.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I missed it so bad the time before. I had to make up for that.
Joel, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your stories and your set list.
Mike, thanks for having me, and John and Brian and Paul and Phil. My best to all you guys. It was a pleasure to meet you, and fun playing Guess the Year.
Oh yeah, Joel, I just wanted to mention I've actually, when I heard you were going to be the host, I haven't read any of your books probably in a couple of years, but I did read the one on the hate and the one on Altamont, both excellent, and I'm looking forward to getting another one pretty soon.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks, John. It's a pleasure meeting you.
No, I love the writing style. Like Mike was saying earlier, it makes you want to turn the page, which is what a book's all about.
I agree. That's good to hear.
Well,
Yeah,
Drums and Demons is another page turner. The link is in the show notes to order it. It's
excellent.
great.
I'm in the market for a new one.
Can I just say thank you to Mike for all the hard work you put into the show? I know it can't be easy putting all this together, but it's been really fun listening the last couple of years. So
thank you, Brian. Really kind to you. All right. Thank you so much for listening. For all the show links, including our YouTube channel, go to guesttheyear.net. And if you want to be a contestant on the show, sponsor the show, or make comments and ask questions, email us, info@guesttheyear.net. Shout out to Dylan, James, and Jack for helping out behind the scenes. Thank you, Joel Selvin, for curating this week's set list. Again, his book, Drums and Demons, on Jim Gordon is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to the amazing tapers whose recordings made the show possible. Congratulations to John for winning, and to other contestants, thanks for playing. And remember, it is all one song anyway.
And I bid you good night. Good night, good night, and I bid you good night, good night, good night.